Chauffeurs who drive around rich people. What are some of the weird or shocking conversations you have overheard? Story 1. Friend of mine worked for an upscale concierge chauffeur service. His most memorable moment came when he lost Marie Osman. Fairly simple gig: go to airport and pick up Marie Osman, who was to be the featured entertainer at a private event. Plane comes in, he meets her. She is carry-on bag, but her checked suitcase containing her stage dresses and makeup is missing. She is unflappable, though, asks to be taken to the nearest upscale mall. He does as instructed. She goes into a large upscale department store, selects two long sequin cocktail dresses, and goes to the fitting room to try them on without him. Of course, unfortunately, there are two entrances and exits to the fitting room, and Marie Osman exits out through the other side and cannot find my chauffeur buddy, who is waiting patiently on the side. She'd entered, minus 20 minutes passes. He thinks something has gone wrong, so he grabs a female manager and asks her to go into the fitting rooms and ask for Marie Osman. The manager thinks she is being pranked and declines. Chauffeur buddy is in mini panic mode now, running wildly around the store asking random customers, "Have you seen Marie Osman? Have you seen Marie Osman?" Store security is summoned, and he is asked to leave the premises right now. He calls his employer and tells them he has lost Marie Osman. The employer doesn't have her cell phone number, but has her agent's number, and he is not accepting calls. She is in the meantime taken a cab to the gig, thinking she has been forgotten. Lots of apologies eventually ensued, and there were no repercussions. Story 2. About 25 years ago, I had a summer job at a very tony country club. 6-figure joining fee, 5-figure continuing membership dues, and that got you nothing but the privilege of paying top dollar for rounds food. I was a porter some of the time, as we had cottages on club grounds for members to stay and make a weekend of it. One of my duties was driving members to and from airports, usually private airports for private jets. One time I'm driving two guys to the airport, and one of them starts complaining. Seems he and his wife are always fighting over who gets the jet every weekend and where they want to go. Well, the other one replied, "My third jet is actually just gathering dust right now since my son went to college. Wanna take it off my hands?" They shook on it right there in the van. Story 3. When we were in high school, my friend used a caddy at a local country club. One guy really liked him and asked if he would be willing to drive him around while he went out partying. This was like 2003, and in a pretty rural area. My friend agreed. He picked the guy up at like 8 p.m. Right off the bat, the guy handed him $200. He went to a bar for a little bit. My friend sat in the car. The guy came out, handed him another $200, and told him he had to visit his friend real quick. He went and got a bunch of coke. They went to another bar. He handed my friend another $100 and told him to look out the window and turn up the radio. He then blew several lines. He came out a couple hours later with a girl. He was married with kids. He handed my friend another $200 and they went back to our house. After he came out and asked to be taken to the beach. At this point it was like 2 to 3 a.m. My friend said that the guy slowly walked around the beach, went into the water up to his ankles in his shoes, threw a bunch of rocks into the water, and then sat in the sand for about 45 minutes. He came back to the car and asked to be driven home. When they got out of the car, he hugged my friend and gave him $500 and asked him to never tell anyone what happened. Story 4. I've had multiple people pay me handsomely to let them smoke weed in the car. Heard a French guy yelling at his wife that $10,000 was too much to pay for the bracelets that she bought. Also overheard a lot business deals with absurd amount of money referenced, like tens of millions. Story 5. Not a chauffeur, but seemed like a good chance to remind people of the story of John Boehner at the time, Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives, third in line for the U.S. presidency, not knowing how to use Uber. As the story goes, one of his aides downloaded the app onto his phone and showed him how to use it. Unknown to him, he'd been stuck on the carpooling option, Uber Pool. That's what he used for years. There are all sorts of tales of commuters hopping into their carpool and bam. There's John Boner stuck in a middle seat asking to get dropped off at the Capitol building. However you feel about his politics, I think that's pretty funny. Story 6. Not a chauffeur, and I was a participant in this conversation. I used to tutor an oligarch's daughter in Rublevka, the wealthy suburb outside Moscow. One day she mentioned that she likes to ski. I asked her which kind of skiing she preferred. Downhill is more popular where I'm from, but cross-country is quite popular in Russia. It's even part of some schools' curricula. Her answer. My favorite kind of skiing is the type where you jump out of a helicopter. Silly me, I forgot about that kind. Story 7. My dad was a chauffeur when I was younger, and he told me of one story driving the director of a company down the road, with the Blackpool illuminations in the company limousine. The director was standing up out of the sunroof with his arms out waving at people as he drove past. What the people on the street didn't know is that in the back of the limo there were two prostitutes playing with him. Story 8. One time I was driving a young woman, and right before the destination she screamed for me to pull over. When I asked her what was wrong, she pointed to the couple that was kissing in front of the building. Apparently the man was her fiancé. She didn't get out, she didn't cry, but she did ask if I could take her back to where I picked her up. I'll never forget her face. It was the saddest face I have ever seen in person. Another time I was picking up a group of guys outside a club early in the morning, and as the first guy stumbled and a Glock fell out of his coat pocket, we just locked eyes and I said, "Hope that's not for me, haha." I was nervous and didn't really know what to do, say. Probably my favorite was picking up two college-age girls from what I can only assume was a party. They were very drunk, and the second girl was basically completely gone. They were going all the way to Ridgewood, which was almost an hour. Girl A was pretty talkative and funny. Girl B looked to be completely passed out, sleeping, and didn't move the whole trip. We made it to Ridgewood and Girl B sits up suddenly, looks around, opens the door, and vomits everywhere. She seemed fine after that, but I just kept thanking her for making it the whole way and not throwing up all over my car. Story 9. I used to drive limousine and taxi. One time I got the manager of a fairly famous Canadian band in my car asking me where to buy coke. I had no idea where and I told him that. So his bright idea was to find a prostitute, hire her, and ask her. I told him I couldn't help him pick out prostitutes either. He was disappointed but understood. He had me drive down a well-known street until he saw a prostitute. He asked me to pull over, got out of the taxi, paid the fare, and then immediately flagged me down again as a new ride. I knew what was up, but whatever. He gets back into the car with the prostitute, and she tells him exactly what house to go to for some coke. I take them there and wait a bit. They come back out and I drive him back to the venue. Then he offers me free tickets to the show, which I gladly accepted as loved that band and had seen them 3 times. Alas, since I was still working during the show, I gave them away to 2 friends who had never seen the band. They had a good time and I had a fun story to share with them about how I scored those tickets. Not really a shocking conversation and hardly a famous person, but it was interesting how easily and full of trust people can be about searching out and buying drugs in a strange city. For the record, this was 2003. Story 10. Buddy of mine ended up picking up a Netflix producer while doing Uber. He said they had a great conversation. As he brought him to his hotel, the producer invited him up for a drink, and since my friend was a film student, he thought it'd be a good idea to go and try to get some good networking in. They hung out for about an hour when he asked my friend if he knew of any massage places with happy endings. He didn't, but the guy paid him $500 to bring him to the closest massage place, which was only a few miles out. Upon dropping him off, he gave my buddy a card and said, "There's a big festival I'm hosting. That's your ticket in. I'll let you know then if I get that happy ending, haha." He got the happy ending. Story 11. Wasn't exactly a chauffeur, but I did have the distinguished privilege of working with a multimillionaire one time for a couple days, and I was just astounded at how out of touch he was with people. One conversation he was talking about how he hated all the new homes they were building, and he liked old castles, so he was having a castle in Scotland, disassembled and reassembled here in the US piece by piece. On another occasion, he asked me why I wasn't in college yet. The job was after high school, and I was working as a plumber, and gave me an alright when I told him I couldn't afford to go yet and had to save up. Story 12. This is not a limo story, but this thread reminded me of a rich guy story. My daughter played soccer for many years, and at one practice, a guy drove up in a Ferrari, got out, and started talking to another of the dads on the team. After a few minutes, the guy left, and another of the dads went over there and asked him who that guy was. He replied that the guy was his lawyer or something. I come to find out years later that that guy in the Ferrari was a multimillionaire, had one and only one client, that dad, and his only job was to handle the dad's charitable donations. So this dude got filthy rich, donating millions of dollars of somebody else's money and taking a percentage off the top. The dad, who was apparently worth several $100 million, never came across as rich at all. He wore sweats and was at every practice and game. He drove a Camry, had been married to his average-looking wife for like 25 years. Stuff like that. Acted like a normal guy like the rest of us. Story 13. Not a chauffeur. A small part of my family was Chicago Mafia. Grandpa told me a story of a family wedding in Chicago they went to in the late 60s. They were picked up at the airport by a limo with some high-ranking family members. On the way to the hotel, they were stopped about 8 times by various police officers. The officer would walk up to the driver's window. The chauffeur would reach into a money bag and pass a bill to the officer. Nothing would be said, and they'd take off again. Eventually, my grandpa asked if they were being bribed. His cousin Mafia laughed and said, "No, it's Thursday. That's when we pay our boys." So I guess that's how they did it. Looks like a traffic stop and in the open, where it's not unexpected. So I'd imagine that chauffeur had seen some things. Story 14. Was driving as Uber, and I picked up two businessmen in an industrial park. They were building developers. The man who was clearly the boss spoke to me as if I were a man, and I was always the driver who picked him up. Although they were clearly from the Middle East, they chose to speak English. Maybe they thought it was rude not to, being in the US, but if that would have been rude, I'm not sure what the rest of the conversation was. They spoke about the future of business as if it were also feudal, and how everyone will be either very wealthy, like them, or very poor, and how their children really won't be able to get jobs either, but also won't need to. I logged more than 4,000 rides between 2015 and 2017, and that was one of the weirdest. The other weirdest guy picked up from a dispensary. He was really good-looking, very well-dressed, and clearly well-to-do, but he was in some kind of mental distress. He wanted to visit more dispensaries, but had clearly already bought the max. I got his hotel information through conversation, and went there instead. On the way, he told me in all seriousness all about how his father was God, which meant he was Jesus. Didn't you notice how much brighter the sun became when I got in your car? He was serious. He also followed Guns N' Roses like they were the Grateful Dead. He thought Axl Rose was the smartest man alive. He didn't really notice when we got to his hotel instead of the dispensary. I did ask him if he had taken any other drugs that day, and he insisted he hadn't. Story 15. Not a driver, but I used a caddy at a fairly exclusive country club in Massachusetts. It's the kind of place where, no matter how rich you are, you can't buy a membership. You're either born into it or you marry a member. As a result, a lot of the members like to show off their influence by inviting guests who would otherwise be unable to play at the club. Someone invited Mitt Romney. We were given a heads up that the governor, he wasn't a senator yet, would be coming, and they wanted us to know how to act around him. We were told he wanted to be treated like anyone else, but they didn't want us to gawk. So, I guess to make sure us dumb caddies weren't gawking, we were instructed to not look at or acknowledge the governor, because this is precisely how we would treat other people. I did get to shake his hand and chat a little bit. He was friendly, personable, way nicer than a lot of the members. I still don't like a lot of his politics, but he seemed nice enough in person. Story 16. Not a chauffeur, but I work in high-end real estate, so I'm in the homes of the affluent a lot. Once I was in a home selling for over 10 million with two Bentleys in the garage. I overhear the homeowner talking to her friend in the next room. These new tax laws are killing us in the middle class. We had to open another trust just to save more money this year. Insane that this woman really believes that she's the middle class. Another time in another multi-million-dollar house, the homeowner said to me, "The billionaires are pricing us millionaires out of the neighborhood." She referring to her gated community in Park City, and I was apparently supposed to feel sorry for her. Story 17. Many years ago I had a security job that included among my duties the occasional responsibility of driving our rich clients around. I would typically drive them in my employer's Cadillac Escalade that we had for those types of requests, so there was no divider between the front and back seat like in a limo. These were mega rich people who treated me politely but quickly forgot I was present. I overheard conversations about lots of shady and illegal financial stuff. I overheard clients talking about insider trading, embezzlement, price fixing, and stock pumping. I also heard some speaking openly about extramarital affairs, sexual exploits, and expressing racist, sexist, and homophobic attitudes. All of this was done with me sitting a couple of feet away in the driver's seat like I was a piece of furniture instead of an actual human being with ears. Story 18. I had a job as a runner. I would pick up music artists from the airport and drive them to the venue, among other things. I won't name the artists, but I picked up one duo from the airport in an Escalade. It was raining heavy that day, and I had the windshield wipers on next to full. It created a beat. One of the guys has a small handheld sampler and starts making beats in time with the windshield wipers. All of us were driving along, bouncing to the rhythms. It was sweet. Another time, I was driving a famous songwriter, guitarist back to the airport after the gig with his family in a 15-seater van. His family was telling him how great he was, but dude is old. All he could say was, "What?" and "Huh?" It dawned on me he couldn't hear. Bob Percy Plant can't hear shit. I have a ton of other stories, including how I got involved, but I'm not sure if anyone wants to hear them.